Hi, and welcome to everyone. As you just heard, we are recording this session of Crimson Kitchen, the Basics of Baking, with our Director for Culinary Operations, Martin Breslin. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Krista. Hi, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I'm going to, sorry, I just do a quick, okay. Here we are. So hi, everybody. Welcome to my home again in Melrose. I'm going to show you two very simple ways on how to make Irish soda bread. One is very healthy wheat, whole wheat bread, and the other is a white bread. Very different type of recipes. So as we go through it, I'm going to show you how easy this is. If you've never made bread before, this is the best way to start. So the Irish, we're going to start with, I've got a mixing bowl here, hopefully everyone can see, and I'm going to add to that mixing bowl 2.5 cups of whole wheat flour. 2.5 cups of whole wheat flour. Then 3/4 cup of bran. This is unprocessed bran. Bran is the outer part of the grain, so full of fiber. So I'm going to add that in. Always add your dry ingredients first. And then wheat germ. Wheat germ is the part of the grain that, it's the reproductive part of the grain. So also a great source of fiber and whole grains. So that goes in. So it's whole wheat flour, bran, and wheat germ. I did have to get the bran online. I couldn't get it in the stores. And to that, I'm going to put a glove on because I'm going to show you a trick when you're making some bread. A lot of recipes will tell you to empty it out onto your countertop, which makes a really big mess. So I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to put a glove on, which keeps your hand nice and clean as well. So I'm going to get 1 teaspoon of sugar. So always important to have a nice set of these little measuring scoops. So 1 teaspoon is right here. And I'm going to add baking powder first, sugar, 1 teaspoonful of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt. So they're my dry ingredients. So I'm just going to make sure that the dry ingredients are fully mixed. Now this recipe is like a no-knead recipe. So, and it was usually cooked on an open hearth fire. So all my dry ingredients are nicely mixed. Really important that you get the baking soda mixed thoroughly with the flour so it'll rise evenly. And I'm going to add 2.5 cups of buttermilk. But because it's kind of humid outside, you're going to feel that flour actually reacts differently. It's a little heavy in humidity. So I'm going to start with just 2 cups of buttermilk. I got this Kate's Real Buttermilk. I think this is really good. So 2 cups. And I'm going to put in 4 teaspoons of melted butter, which I have right here already measured out. So I've melted butter. And literally, take your hand with your glove and just mix it. There's many different recipes. Now I can feel that this is a little, actually perfect. It's nice and wet, moist, and I can feel the dough is looking really, really good. very soft. And I'm going to put this into a loaf pan, which it's a non-stick, but I did put some butter on it to help it crisp on the bottom. So you literally put it in, and I'm just stamping it down and making sure it covers all the edges. Now, this will be a delicious bread when it's cooked. And mostly people eat this with smoked salmon and butter. You can eat it any way you want.
Chef, if you didn't have a bread pan, do you have to use a bread pan to make it?
A loaf pan?
A loaf
You
pan.
just finished saying any way you want.
Right. Whoever that is, thank you. So you could put it in a cookie pan if you want. So I'm going to put this in the oven and bake it for 45 minutes at 375 degrees. So off it goes into the oven. And we're going to make our next bread. So this is very different. I've got a larger bowl, and this is a white soda bread, and I'm using white flour, 3.5 cups of all-purpose white flour. And it's a teaspoon of salt, which I'm putting in, teaspoon of salt. And I always follow the ingredients in the recipe line by line, always go that way so you don't miss anything. 1 teaspoonful of baking soda, an egg, which I'm going to put, but as we did with the other bread, I'm going to make sure that my dry ingredients are mixed first, right? Very soft white flour. So I'm putting it on. Sure, everything is nicely mixed. Now this is the kind of bread you can add raisins to and dried fruit if you wanted. You could even put pecans or walnuts in it, but typically in Ireland it was made this way. So once you have the actual recipe mix ready, so I'm going to add, I bet an egg, oh no, pardon me, before I do the egg, I'm going to add the butter. So the butter is not melted like in the other recipe. So the butter is 2 tablespoons of butter, and I will take off my glove for this, because if you ever make pastry, I'm going to actually work the butter through the flour. And when you do this, it's different than pouring in melted butter. It actually acts like when you make pastry, it makes it lighter. It actually adds to the lightness of the bread. The whole wheat bread is not as delicate as this. So I'm working the butter right through with my fingertips. And I can feel it, that it's getting there. So there's tiny little pockets of butter throughout the recipe. And when that melts, it'll help rise along with the baking soda, it'll help rise the bread.
Jeff, a question. Can you have any substitutes for buttermilk?
You can use milk, full milk, but it just is not going to taste the same. There's a very distinctive taste using the buttermilk, and the buttermilk is a byproduct of actually making butter. So in lots of farms in Ireland, they would use this particularly for making bread. And it just gives a really nice flavor, very different than using it without buttermilk. Like a little sourness to it.
Can you, I believe you can add vinegar to regular milk to make buttermilk if you can't get.
I've never done that. To me, that's not real buttermilk. Buttermilk really should be a byproduct of making butter. All you're doing with putting vinegar in is you're making sour milk. You're not making buttermilk. So it really should be the byproduct of making butter. And some people did use sour milk. Sour milk would often, if milk went sour, it was used for baking. Absolutely. So now I have all my butter is in, my dry ingredients are in. I have an egg that I have beaten. That's going in. And I'm going to add 1 3/4 cups of buttermilk. Now, I'm going to mix this together. The difference with this bread and the other bread that I just put in the oven, I'm going to knead this. I'm going to bring it together and knead it. Now you can see if I dump that out on the kitchen counter, it'll be what a mess to clean up. So I'm not going to do that. And it's a little sticky now. So I'm going to add a little bit more white flour to it. So if it's very sticky, it's very easy, just not too much, just a little bit, because I want this to be a nice soft dough. And that just a tiny little bit of flour made a huge difference right there. This feels really soft, so I'm going to work the gluten in it a little bit. And you can knead a dough ball in a bowl. You don't need to put it out on the counter. It's still a little sticky. And by kneading, I'm just pulling the dough in. So it forms a nice, and I'm not going to knead it like I would knead yeast bread. Really work the dough. I'm just going to do it, you know. So I get a soft, nice, perfect round. And as I said earlier, you know, the amount of liquid when you're making bread does vary on the humidity. So in the winter, when there's hardly any humidity, you would use, you know, more. And then in the summer, if it's very humid, the flour just absorbs moisture and you're using less. But if you can see that, that looks like a really nice dough ball. Not quite there yet. Pulling the dough in.
What are you going for as you're kneading? What are you trying to?
So I'm trying to achieve, I don't want any cracks in the dough. I want the dough to be nice and soft and smooth. So it's all pulled together and the flour is kind of tighter. I mean, the dough is tighter. And I don't want to aggressively overdo it, because this is just regular white flour. Most of the flour you use, baking flour, is a higher gluten content. Now, if you can see that, see the dough ball? That was very quick to knead it. It's very soft, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to place it on a baking tray. Now, you don't need to get a rolling pin and roll this out. I always do it by hand. What I'm doing is I'm literally going to just push it down and make it into a circle. That's a beautiful dough ball, very soft. Of course, my hands are covered in dough. So traditionally, in Ireland, as they are a little superstitious, the bread, you always put a cross on the bread. So you cut a cross on the bread. And that was a sign of thanks and a blessing to those who lived in the house. So now we have the fork, and when I show you in a few minutes what it looks like cooked, you will see that it's easier than just to portion and cut into slices. So before I put it in the oven, I'm just going to put some melted butter on the top so it will form a nice crust. Everyone see that? How easy is that? 2 loaves of bread. People tell you making bread is difficult. It is not. Now, this is also gone in the oven. It's at a higher temperature. I'm going to put a higher up in the oven. And when the other bread comes out, I will fire that oven up more because this white bread actually takes longer to cook. Now, the bread I just put in the oven, I put it in a few minutes ago. Look how it's rising. Do you see that?
Yeah.
It's already nearly at the top of the tin. And of course, on all my cooking classes, brought to you by the magic of Zoom, I have made a couple of loaves earlier. So I made 2 loaves of bread earlier. And I'm going to show you. I'm going to taste with you. So when you know the bread is cooked, 2 things you can do. Tap it if it feels hollow, it's not solid. Or if you're still not sure, take a little toothpick and stick it right in the center. And if it comes up mostly dry, the bread is done. And the very same on the white bread. So I take the loaf pan, like that. And if you can see, it's a beautiful slice of whole wheat bread. And I've got some Kerrygold butter here. Now that would most often be served like this. And if you're serving smoked salmon, you would eat this with your smoked salmon. I'm going to just taste it because I haven't tasted it yet.
Wish we could.
Don't do the vinegar and milk. You got to have it with the buttermilk. That is so good. Now, the white bread, you can make a sandwich out of this. But commonly, it's served with a nice cup of tea. Now, see how beautiful that is? It's soft. It's light, looks delicious. And that would often be served with a cup of tea. In England, of course, they have cream tea, where you have scones and Devonshire cream. In Ireland, this is our kind of version of that, but it's served with tea, and it's the white bread with a really good, we call it jam, but it's jelly preserve. And kids love this. And I'll taste it for you.
Wish we could.
It's really good. Now, how simple was that in 20 minutes? But I did weigh out the ingredients. But it is so simple to make. 2 delicious loaves of bread. And when your friends come over for dinner, hopefully sometime in the near future, they will be so impressed with eating bread that is kind of a forgotten art. We're so used to processed bread with preservatives in it. This has none of that.
So a question came in, what's the best way to store the bread so it doesn't go stale? And I know that's, particularly with fresh bread.
Mm-hmm. So if you have a brown paper bag, that's a good way of storing it. It'll keep the crust crispy. I would not put it in a plastic paper bag. That actually tends to make it go soggy on the outside. But traditionally, what people would do is they would store it wrapped in a kitchen towel, just literally on the counter in the kitchen towel, and you'd eat it in a day or 2. But most with families, they probably consume it that day. There's nothing as delicious as freshly baked bread in the morning with your breakfast, and you can so easily do this.
So I wonder if I could ask you, lots of people are daunted by baking.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between this recipe, for example, and some other kinds of baking?
Well, yeast breads are much different to make, and that would have taken 2 hours to make, to let the bread relax, and then re-knead the dough and so on. So that's a whole different process. But that's why I think people are kind of shy. They shy away from making bread. But if you can master these 2 recipes, and so simple to do, you might actually fall in love with soda bread and prefer soda bread to have with your meals and enjoy them. This brown bread is just so delicious and healthy, and you're not going to get that in the store. It's got preservatives in it.
And you talked a little bit about some of the add-ins that one might put in. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, in the white bread particularly, my mother sometimes would often put in currants or raisins. But when you do that, when you add them in, put them in a little bit of flour first. If you don't do that, they'll get into the dough and they'll sink to the bottom. So you can add dried fruit in that way to the bread. But that was mostly what people would add. And nuts. You could do like toasted walnuts or pecans with the currants. You have a very different bread. You could have a pecan raisin bread with the white bread. You could put pecans and raisin in. I mean, just do like a half cup first. And if you feel like you want more, and put those in with your dry ingredients. Always put them in with your dry ingredients so they get evenly dispersed. And as time goes on, you could say, well, maybe I prefer more of the fruit and pecans in it.
Terrific.
Also delicious.
If there are questions, you can certainly post them in the chat. Chef, what other sort of, what would you say are the keys to success when you're baking?
Your baking soda has to be fresh. It will lose its ability to rise the bread if it's stored for too long. And you do not want to use baking powder with buttermilk, because without getting too much into the science of it, the reaction between the acid in the buttermilk, the lactic acid, and in the baking soda is what helps the bread to rise. If you put baking powder with the buttermilk, you're not going to get that. You're going to get a flatter bread. That's why we don't use that. So follow the ingredients, and you know, if the dough is a little too dry, it's still going to be okay. You know, it's still going to be a nice bread. And you can, if you make it a few times, and it's really by trial and error, that you'll feel the dough and you'll feel how the brown bread should be nice and moist. You need it. And it's, you know, you cook it a little bit more if you feel you put too much buttermilk in, but you just get to feel a bit. And the white bread, you can see after I kneaded it, how light it is. It's absolutely delicious. You could make the same bread, cut a slice, make a pastrami sandwich on it, or a corned beef sandwich, or a ham and cheese. You can totally use it as a savory bread. It doesn't have to be sweet. Or if you're having dinner with soup, delicious with soup.
Well, Chef, we wish we were having tea with you. I don't see any further questions in the chat, just lots of envy that you have all that delicious bread there. So,
well, I wish everyone a great 4th of July weekend, and be safe.
Thank you so much, Chef.
Thank you.
Thank you.